he ventured. "And if Tommy and Edward join—" He realised his mistake even as she whirled around to face him, spoon still in her hand. "Shame on you, Lewis Finch, for trying me so. Do you not think I have grief enough with your brother's silly talk of uniforms and fighting? You'll do as you're told." She broke off, her thin face creased with concern. "Oh, Lewis, I don't want you to go to the country, but the government says you must." "But Kath—" "Kath is 15 next month and has a job in the factory. You're still a child, Lewis, and I won't rest unless you're safe." She came to him and pushed his thick, fair hair from his forehead as she looked into his eyes. "Besides, it's all just talk now, and I don't for 1 minute believe we're really going to have a war. Now go on with you, or you'll be late for school, and get your dirty boots off my table," she added with a telling glance at his feet. "I'm not a child," Lewis grumbled aloud when he banged his way out the front door, and for a moment he was tempted to give school a miss altogether. It didn't seem right to sit in a stuffy classroom on the first day of September. He looked up Steppendale Street, thinking longingly of the newts and tadpoles waiting in the clay ditch behind the fence, but he hadn't anything to collect them in. And besides, if he was late, Miss Jenkins would smack his hands with her ruler in front of the class, and his mum had threatened to send him to St. Edmund's if he got into trouble again. With a sigh, he stuck his hands in his pockets and trudged off to school. The morning wore away, and through the open window of his class in Cubitt Town School, Lewis could see the dark bulk of the warehouses lining the riverfront. Beyond the warehouses lay the great ships with their exotic cargoes: sugar from the West Indies, bananas from Cuba, Australian wool, tea from Ceylon. Miss Jenkins's geography lecture faded. What did she know about the world, Lewis thought, as she droned on about taxes and levies and acts. Now at the Penang, she could tell you about far-off places. She could tell you about things that really mattered. One of the few masted ships that still came up the Thames, she lay in Britannia Dry Dock for refitting, and just the smell of her made Lewis shiver. After school, he'd... The creak of the classroom door brought Lewis back with a blink. Mr. Bales, the headmaster, stood just inside the door, and the expression on his long, narrow face was so odd that Lewis felt his heart jerk. From the corridor rose a dull roar of sound, the chattering of children in other rooms. "Miss Jenkins! Children!" Mr. Bales cleared his throat. "You must all be very brave. We've just had an announcement on the wireless. War is imminent. The government has given orders to evacuate. You're all to go home and report back here with your bundles in 1 hour." He turned away, but with his hand on the door turned back to them and shook his finger. "You must have your name tags and gas masks, don't forget, and no more than an hour." The door closed after him. For a moment the room held its breath. Then a shout came from Ned Norris in the back row. "A holiday! We've got a holiday!" The class took up the chanting as they surged out to meet the other children in the hall. Lewis joined in, pushing through the front doors and leaping from the steps with a Red Indian whoop. But his heart wasn't in it. The children scattered, but as Lewis turned up Cecil Street, his feet slowed. He was suddenly aware of the sounds of the island, the constant clangs, creaks and whistles from the docks, and from the river the hoots of the tugs and the low thrumming of the ship's engines. How could there be a war when nothing had changed? He thought of the Penang again, being fitted out for her return journey to Australia. He'd stow away, start a new life in the outback, not be parcelled off to some strange family in the country like a piece of stray baggage. Almost 11 was old enough for a job. He was big for his age and strong. Surely someone would have him. Turning into the top of Steppendale Street, he saw his father's...